Hey, what's up, world? It's Patrick Global Truth Bomb riffing the con on Tuesday, August 15th at 10:45 a.m. my time. And just a quick response to the world writ large to basically say the same thing I've said forever, but with slightly more information and more validation of everything that I'm trying to tell you to try to squeeze through the membrane of everybody's dystopia to be able to try to penetrate the lobotomized zombies to try to configure and generate and domino a massive uprising, an uprising to crush corruption and drown the fascism that it fuels. So, look, I think the topic of the day is RICO, racketeering, right? Which we saw come down the pike, and another 13 indictments from Fonnie Willis, the DA in Atlanta, as it relates to Donald Trump's organization, stealing the election and everything that is involved with that, including further documentation, fabrication with the fake electors, which of course is a felony and is against the law. And meanwhile, when you take the sum total of the four indictments that are now up to 91 charges, and you look at the government's case against Donald Trump, what the full narrative is that Donald Trump defrauded the United States, which of course is a crime. It's interesting. From the very beginning of my journey, fraud was always a perplexing scenario for me to try to reveal. It's such a simple word. It conveys exactly what it is, but most people disassociate from what the meaning of the word is by way of what it means in context to criminality. Because of what happened with Hillary Rodham Clinton and also Barack Obama, they kind of made it out that Wall Street's practices, which were front and center in the 2016 election, particularly in the Democratic primaries, were shenanigans, as I recall Hillary Rodham Clinton describing as she was taking $400,000 paydays from Goldman Sachs, among others. And shenanigans to me has always been the stuff of, like, let's say Blutarsky in Animal House when he takes off with Mandy Pepperidge at the end of Delta House, sabotaging Dean Wormer's glorious parade because of all of the stuff that was happening to Delta House, and they were fighting the system. Okay, one of the greatest movies of all time in my life, and basically, for those of you who don't know me, sets the framing of my sense of humor, for example. But I can assure you, what I'm revealing to you in 2023 is not shenanigans. Fraud is illegal theft by deception, which is criminal. And if you understand the criminal justice system, you understand that it's a felony. Now, there are different degrees of felonies with different, levels of, of, just the way they lay out in terms of, what kind of penalty there's going to be, accountability. But what I continue to have to live in the midst of, in the eye of this hurricane, and how I have to continue to grapple with everybody's mind, including my own, to try to create this grand epiphany in the United States, is as a result of this insane journey that I've been on that seems never ending, but that is coming to a conclusion one way or the other. And I think of it as The Stand. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Stephen King book that I think was written in the late 70s, but it basically created the storyline that there was this old, pandemic that created, just massive death and destruction and suffering in society. And ultimately the survivors had to go to two camps. One was evil and one was fighting for justice. And that's kind of where we are in 2023. And it's getting worse and worse. But what people need to be aware of, because I know you're out there, I know that there's millions of you out there intuitively aware of this, but this is the way the playing field is. Right-wing billionaires that are incredibly motivated and have been for a very long time have been puppeteering the system with technology and everything else to create basically these vectors of what I think of as Cambridge Analytica 3.0 on Twitter especially, or X, where they're vectors of hate and sex bots, where they're basically just providing misinformation and disinformation and so much overwhelming information that nobody can see the forest for the trees. Welcome to the world 2023. It's been this way for a very, very long time. Meanwhile, I have the answers that can take down the entire system that has completely destroyed us. And Donald Trump is the perfect reflection of everything that I have been trying to get your attention to elevate the truth above the madness of lies. And so, in the case of Donald Trump, what we saw in these 13 indictments yesterday, including documentation fabrication for the elector certifications with the Electoral College, and this being involved with, ironically, Rudolph Giuliani, who was really basically the I don't know, forerunner of RICO, Racketeering Influence Corrupt Organization, when he took on the 5 mob families in New York in the 70s and the 80s. So there's that, because he's, of course, a part of Trump's team, ironically, who goes back to the 70s and 80s in Manhattan, and all of these, storylines intertwine over the course of time. But Donald Trump is being basically, the narrative is that the sum total of all of these things that Donald Trump was involved with was to defraud the United States, to steal the election, and they're going to hold him accountable. And racketeering is part of that. Now, meanwhile, what I'm revealing to you, and what many of you already know, is that we've been on this sort of downward spiral for the last 40 years, where we've seen more and more consolidation, more and more globalization, more and more things behind the scenes that have created a system that has created more and more power in the hands of the few. And many of you out there say all the time, well, the system is corrupt and everybody knows that. But what I continue to tell you is you don't know the details, and the details matter above all else. So let's take Donald Trump just briefly as a sort of mirror of what it is that I'm trying to, smash through the dystopia of everybody's, unfortunately, resistance to the truth. And that is, for example, that the government has demonstrated that it's illegal to lie on documentation fabrication, which is a felony, and people are going to go to jail, or they're going to turn on Trump and he's going to go down. That racketeering is illegal if the sum total of the enterprise is doing illegal activities that you can prove every step of the way were involved with laws that were broken that can be held accountable because they're felony charges, sort of thing, which is on display in all 4 cases of Donald Trump. And of course, I think we're up to 91 indictments at this point. So, what we've seen time and time again with Donald Trump, for example, is that A, lawyers lie. Oh, yeah, they lie. B, judges can become corrupt. Oh, yeah, that's a thing. C, that you can steal and loot money through all sorts of different tricks and practices of deception that, once again, are illegal. Okay, and most of us understand theft when we see somebody try to steal somebody's purse, or like we just saw 2 days ago, that there was, what do they call it, a mob? I can't even remember what the term is. Like this mob group that all went into like a high-end retail store in San Francisco, or was it Los Angeles? It might have been Los Angeles, where they overwhelmed the security and they all stole and looted the place at the same time. And this is becoming a thing. And of course, it was filmed on YouTube. I mean, this is our society. It's a failed state, and we've got 2 different things that are happening. 2 different things. We've got 1,000 different things, but many of us see homelessness all over the place, which is a demonstration or a reflection of failed state. Then you see MAGA. MAGA is like all of these white people who don't give a living crap. They could care less about liberty and justice for all and the rule of law and everything else. They want to just rule over everybody else, and that's really what it comes down to. So they are not American. They're just the Confederacy that's always been there from the very beginning. And we've learned a lot of lessons through the American history and the experience, through wars and battles and suffering and all sorts of other scenarios that have taken place to shape who we are. But it's kind of like 2 steps forward, 4 steps back, 1 step forward, 2 steps back, and all of these different scenarios. And it's now incumbent upon us, the American people, who are on the side of righteousness, who are on the side of liberty and justice for all, who are on the side of the integrity of law, who are on the side of accountability, so that we can have a fair society where the American dream is available to all, and that it's an even playing field, and equality actually matters. Okay, so there's that, right? That's all sort of principled, that's ethos, that's sort of ideology, but it's also the principles and the premise of our system of separation of powers that's supposed to function a certain way. That's not. And so what I'm revealing to you is, in the government's case against Donald Trump, which I'd love to see him like a pig with an apple in his mouth at a luau roasted, because he is that corrupt and then some. But I have to thank him at the same time for demonstrating and reflecting and refracting exactly what I've been trying to tell you all along, that media and government has hid from you, that what the government is now demonstrating to be let's call it a line too far, but just in terms of being able to prosecute the law the way it's supposed to be written, because we all depend on the law being accountable to everybody, that no man or person or corporation is above the law, presumably, which then is how our democracy functions, of course, right? And so what you hear all the time is like, this is a fight for our democracy. No, it's not, because our democracy was lost long, long, long time ago. The real nail in the coffin of democracy was the collapse of 2008, when the real coup d'etat happened, when the financial system moved into position to completely control our country because of the nature of money, because of the nature of power, because of the nature of dark money and Citizens United and political influence and how things work. And when you go the distance on a journey to understand all of the pieces, what you come to understand is that the government is demonstrating now what I'm demonstrating to you, that the government and media neglected, ignored, hid, obfuscated, manipulated, betrayed your knowledge of what Wall Street did to create the largest coup d'etat in the history of our country that nobody understands. That led to over 50 million people getting crucified, destroyed in a system that was a racketeering enterprise premised on deceptive acts and practices that ultimately used tens of millions of illegal documentation fraud to create all sorts of a facade that blew up the world, that in the aftermath ultimately used the same tactics to bury illegal tens of millions in the courts, because ultimately, as the ultimate core of all of this is what happened at the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is the central bank of the United States that has extraordinary lending capacity, particularly as lender of last resort, so that if there's some sort of monumental catastrophic scenario to our economy, that the central bank can be there as a last gasp measure to make sure things can still function. Well, they did so in this particular case, but they did so illegally to guarantee, with the full faith and credit of the United States, a massive global racketeering enterprise that we show you in our work, The Con, at www.thecon.tv, which is now free, where they pumped illegally $29 trillion, there's 1,000 billion and a trillion, to this financial apparatus that destroyed the world and owned the courts to get away with effectively what the United States is demonstrating Donald Trump is guilty of. So if you're getting super kind of excited about Donald Trump being like, this sort of measure that democracy can withstand this sort of, challenge to itself through this autocratic sort of, betrayal and everything else that's going on with this right-wing manipulation and juggernaut and this confederacy that, has been really evolving for, I don't know, very beginning of the American existence, and we've been fighting it ever since. Well, the time is now to fight the two-front war on behalf of those that are actual patriots who believe in liberty and justice for all, separation of powers, and all that it constitutes. All of the answers are in www.thecon.tv. Also, I've laid out in another, monumental revelation, a podcast that we call The New Untouchables, that are on The Real Progressives, and you can check that on, Google, do a Google search on that, and then ultimately, you can find me all over the place at Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs The Con, both on YouTube and also on TikTok. But look, guys, I'm last man standing, and I'm the only one who's got the truth, that's willing to tell you what the entirety of media and power has hidden from you to destroy tens of millions of lives. Now, what Wall Street got away with helped about, let's call it 10% of the population. They did okay. Obviously, the top 0.001% did extremely well. That's all based on a facade. It was all based on free money to billionaires. And by the way, billionaires spend billions to loot trillions. Loot means to steal, by the way. Just like fraud is deceptive acts and practices, just like the United States government is proving that Donald Trump defrauded the United States, well, Wall Street defrauded the world with deceptive acts and practices, which we show you in the con, and there's so much more. What I'm doing has to have your skin in the game because of what I just said. Billionaires spend billions, and that includes multinationals, and that's like huge oil companies and big finance companies and everything else. They completely own the system through a kleptocracy to basically control the world. That's not democracy. That's not separation of powers. That's not the integrity of law. We've seen the corruption in the Supreme Court. We've seen the corruption in Congress. We've seen the corruption in the White House. My God, what we've got on display right now is all things Trump. And then, of course, by a much, much, much lesser measure, but still problematic to say the least, Hunter Biden and all things Burisma and whatever that's going to reveal, even though that's all really questionable. But guys, we're a complete disaster. And corruption births and fuels fascism. I am the enemy of both. I am the champion of liberty and justice for all, and I went the distance to bring this information to you that cost us everything. Cost us $4.5 million to be able to create this stuff, but I sacrificed everything to get here. Look at me. I look like a freaking mess at the moment. I'm in between things and I'm dropping these guys when I can. But the bottom line is we have got to raise your involvement and investment. And if you invest $13 into what we're trying to create, which is a tidal wave populist crusade to purge corruption, we've got the answers that can take the whole system down. That took us $4.5 million to do it, by the way, in addition to tens of thousands of hours and sacrifice and everything that comes with it. And that means 357,000 of you would have to basically kick in $13 a piece if you did to match what we've already done. But there's so many more people. There's literally, if we took, there was over 100 million victims, direct victims of the 2008 great financial crisis. If we got 13% of that number, we'd get $169 million, and we'd create a Lollapalooza-like tour to take these truths to the American people to break through this incredible manipulated dystopia that media and government has been able to pull the wool over your eyes because they keep pissing on your head telling you it's right. And I want to wind up on this tour ultimately in Washington, D.C., under the gaze of Abraham Lincoln, who proclaimed at the Gettysburg Address that a nation of by and for the people shall not perish from this earth. That's what this is all about. A democracy can only withstand the challenges to it with an informed populace. The truth matters. But at the moment, all of you are buying lies. I've got to find the millions of you who aren't suckers, who aren't fascists, who aren't Nazis, who aren't Confederates, who aren't betrayers of the Constitution, who believe in liberty and justice for all. And I'll finish off with this. If you, me, and everyone you see who isn't a Nazi, who believes in dignity and decency, integrity and sustainability and beauty, if we merge in unity, we will defeat the tyranny of misery. There is no time. This is all about the clean New Deal. If you know anything about history, this is the progressive movements from Teddy Roosevelt and trust busting through FDR and the New Deal. This is the clean New Deal. We have the answers that can rip the power back of the corruption to create a government of by and for the people. But it needs your buy-in, and we need it today. And none of us are going to last because we're in crisis over crisis over crisis. And if you feel like you're getting excited that democracy is going to withstand and do the right thing and prove that justice matters by taking down Donald Trump, understand Donald Trump is child's play compared to what I'm talking about. You can't look at this and get excited about it and then ignore what happened in 9/11. You can't ignore what happened in 2008. We have got to turn the table on the denizens of disaster that have betrayed us all. Failure is not an option. Rise, war, revolt, onwards and upwards.